Hi everyone. So we're going to be going live with a few incredible authors of children's books about grief. And I am so excited to have these talented, incredible people on. Let's see if we can get them to join. You might need to put in a request, and then we'll be able to have everybody. Oh, here we go. Randy, I see your request. Accept. Let's see. Hopefully we can get everybody on really quickly. Amazing. Hi, Randy. So good. It's incredible. Like, we read each other's posts and then, hi, how are you, Jessica?
Hi.
So good to see you. And Corey's right there. Let's see if we can get her on. And hopefully we can get our conversation going. Amazing. Hi, Corey.
Hello. Hi.
So incredible. I have to just say that I am so excited about this live because I feel like as I was preparing for it now, as I was like sifting through some of the questions and stuff, I was like, we just basically put a bunch of powerhouses on grief and people are excited about that. And that means we've all done a really good job on this platform.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm thrilled because I think the topic of kids' books and literature for kids, I think we all come from a space where we know the need for different reasons, and we're going to get into that soon. And it's really a space that's slowly beginning to fill a bit more than it was certainly several years ago, but it's still kind of a very niche-based space that takes some brave souls to wander into. So what I think we're going to start with is just have everybody introduce themselves, both your name, a little bit about what you do, and the book that you wrote, and just like in a couple sentences about the book. And of course, we're going to get into more about everybody's books soon. So Randy, why don't you start?
Sure. First of all, I'm so thrilled to be here with all of you. What an honor, and just so excited to have this conversation and to be with all three of you. I'm Randy Wolfson, and I write a page called Grief and Grits on Instagram and Facebook. And I have a book called Eddie's Brave Journey. I can show how one little Eddie learned all about grief. And I am really, my goal in writing my Grief and Grits is to share from my own personal experience of having become at the age of 10 when my 41-year-old dad died. And so basically a griever, nearly all my life. And then I worked in the field of grief for about 12 years. And when I left that job, I thought, gosh, what do I do with all information and education and my personal experience? I'll try a Facebook page. And that's what I did. And it's just been the most wonderful experience. I love this space, and so I'm just excited to be part of it. Thank you.
Amazing. Wow. Well, thank you. I'm just curious, by the way, for a second. The book came before the Facebook page, or the Facebook page came first?
No, the Facebook page came first. I started August of 2017, and I thought I'll give myself till the end of the year in December. If 50 people follow along, I'll keep going. And they did. And here I am years later. And
Wow.
the book I started was about 2018.
2018.
Yeah.
Amazing. Wow. Okay, well, that was one great introduction. So I'm going to go just the order of which you guys appear on my screen, which may be different for all of you. But Corey, let's go to you next. So tell us a little bit introduce yourself and a little bit about your book.
Sure, yes, and I'll give a disclaimer. I just got out of a workout class, so that is why I look like an apple. I was like,
you look amazing, so don't worry.
You do what you can. We wear so many hats. So yeah, I'm Corey. I'm Dr. Lee. I wear a lot of hats. I am an associate professor and a program director of a thanatology program. I have a private practice here in New Mexico, and I can now add author to the CV. I am the author of What Does Grief Feel Like, published with Free Spirit Publications. I've been a child life specialist for 18 years, 19 depending on like how you add the math. But I've been in this space for quite some time, and I wrote the book really as um, out of a clinical need. I was really quite frustrated with the grief literature, insofar that there are a lot of wonderful books out there. But when you're looking from a child development perspective and you're trying to use it as a psychoeducational tool, I was pasting pages together, sometimes just completely overlooking them. And oftentimes I would write my own book with the children I worked with. And so this is really a culmination of those many years of experience working in pediatric hospice, palliative care, and grief support.
Wow. Wow. That's incredible. And do you want to tell people for just like in a couple lines what your book is? Like,
yeah, absolutely. So What Does Grief Feel Like is a psychotherapy book written for young children, and it really breaks down what the grief experience is like, not just as an emotion, but as a somatic experience, as a relational experience, and as a communal experience. So it really uses very simple, concrete language. And there are also questions embedded throughout the pages to help facilitate a conversation. So it really should be used with an adult and the child. And at the last conference I went to, somebody said that they used this book with their spousal loss group. So they had 83-year-olds using this book and finding benefit from it. And that just touches my heart to know that the language and the imagery and the message of the book really can transcend age and culture. And so, yeah, I'm just so very proud of it.
incredible. And just to add to that point, it's interesting because I've been doing these book reviews of different kids' books, and every time I do this disclaimer of like, these are kids' books that adults love too, because I still find, and just by way of background, I lost my mother at the age of 9. My father passed away when I was in my 30s. And I find that although I read a ton of like these long and complicated books and memoirs and psychoeducational tools and stuff like that, the bottom line is that when I read a kid's book, I'm much more deeply affected. It resonates. I think that we keep it real for kids. And that's why at the end of the day, it's like, don't give me this stuff that's gonna like sound great for some publishing house. Give me the real feeling or the real experience. And you know, that's why I think we all end up loving the kids' books a lot more. And I work with kids and teens who lost a parent in our organization, and I find that you'll have the 17-year-olds or the 19-year-olds, they prefer to take the kids' books off the shelf any day, hands on, you know, as opposed to anything that's 250 pages. Jessica, introduce yourself and your book.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Correnti, and a little background about myself. Like Corey, I am a certified child life specialist. I have been a certified child life specialist for 15 years. So I started my career in the hospital setting. I spent time working in pediatric intensive care units, a few other units as well, but that was the start of my career. And so I've always worked with grieving families and families just facing really heavy times within the hospital setting. And then grief hit me personally, and I became a bereaved parent. I went through 6 pregnancy losses, and I mostly talk about my daughter Maggie, who died at 22 weeks gestation. And I kind of say she's become like the spokesperson for my other losses too. They kind of like encompass all of them in a way. But what I realized after going through my own experiences, of course, going through something like that, it changes you in every single aspect of your life, from your professional identity to your personal identity and everything in between. And I became really involved in supporting grieving families with a nonprofit organization and started leading a bereaved sibling group. That was just such a huge passion of mine. I've always had a huge passion working with children who are grieving, especially bereaved siblings. But what I realized when doing this group, much like Corey talked about, is that there is this gap in literature and types of very specific books that I was looking for. One topic specifically that I was looking for was helping children understand that their sibling has died and is not physically present, and at the same time, and at the same time, they are still connected forever through their love and their memories and relationship, and that can continue to grow over years. So I have my book that I wrote called Forever Connected, and this book is specifically for bereaved siblings. Works well for any bereaved sibling loss, but especially for pregnancy and infant loss, it's a little bit more geared towards that. There are some books out there that are more geared towards siblings who have memories, and this one, my book, is great if they don't have memories. It works really well too. So that's a little bit about the what and the why behind my book.
Wow. And I have to say, what's fascinating to me is that when I read your book and when I reviewed it on my page, I also said that is that typically, because I deal with kids who lost a parent, usually I'm looking out for either general grief books or grief books that are very much targeted to kids who lost a parent. And somehow I found that the messaging in your book was so universal that I wanted kids to read it. And I told them, I said, you can replace anything in your head. And it was so easy for them to go there. Like, it was fine. And I think that could take us to the next topic, so to speak, and a question that was posed. And that was that grief is a huge topic, obviously. And it's obviously a heavy topic as well. And you're writing for kids. So the question that came in on my page from a few people in different forums was, how do you write in a way that's authentic, but yet not scaring the daylights out of them and keeping them engaged, because it's got to be a kid's book. I mean, you don't want them running off a second later because we have too many words on the page or it's not engaging in any way. So this is a struggle. And I could say, and I think probably you all can relate, that sometimes I do pick up books for kids in general, and for sure in the grief space, that I look at it and I'm like, nobody tested this on a kid. Somebody wrote this and thought it was a great idea, but they didn't actually try to read it with a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old or a 9-year-old. Like, just clearly not. So I'm wondering what your process is. Like, how do you come up with a thought, and then, like, is it first the idea of the character or the illustrations or the seed of an idea, or is it, and I'm sure for all of you it's probably a little bit different, or is it like, I want to distill this idea, or I came up with this cute character and I can't get him out of my head. So, you know, any of you can start first, whoever feels comfortable, but kind of walk us through the process of what it's like to talk to kids in a book about grief.
Mm.
I can go first because I have this. I actually did a post on this recently. So my book idea, it came directly from parents saying, hey, this is something we're struggling with, trying to help have this conversation at home. And out of really all of the characters in my book, they are directly linked to a specific person, or maybe not totally identified with a specific person, but a culmination of a bunch of different children's stories or children's experiences, or even things that they've come to group and, shared something. So it's a culmination of so many different stories built into, any one character. So, for example, the page in my book where the child says, or the character in this book says, "Where's my real brother?" that came from an actual situation where this child said that to their parent and they were very confused about where their real brother was. They went to the cemetery and visited every single week, but they did not understand, yes, that is your real brother. This child thought that their real brother was still at the hospital. So the stories and the characters within my book specifically were real life situations and real life questions that came up. So I think those that connect with this story, it feels like such a strong connection because they see themselves in these characters and that they've asked those questions, and these are conversations that parents are having at home as well.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's fascinating.
I'll echo that not almost every question in my book is a question that I ask the children I work with, and nearly every statement in the book is something that a child has said to me or a conversation that has unfolded. And I'll just add to that as well. I really believe that my background in child development strongly influenced my ability to understand the readability. There are tools to actually put your text to, and it will spit back like what's the readability level. But that was something that was very important, is understanding the concreteness, even the syllables on a page. And then one step further, because my book is about grief specifically, it was really important to that every sentence on the page was connected to an emotion that I wanted felt and expressed in the images. And so I had just as much, if not more, art direction. Even though I'm not an artist, I knew what I wanted people to feel when they looked at the page. I knew what I wanted to happen when the book was read. And so it kind of just flowed together. And I would say it now have a process for writing a manuscript, but this was my first book, so it was just like a giant brain dump. It was a one-time brain dump. I think this is a very unique book in that it was in my head for about 5 years, and very similar to Jessica, I also experienced a pregnancy loss, and it was on the 1 year anniversary that I sat down at the kitchen table, and this book in its entirety just poured out of me. And so it was just time. It was a place. It was the middle of COVID. There was literally nothing else to do. And so it just felt right at the time.
Incredible. Incredible. Randy.
Well, let's see. So my book, Eddie, literally just popped into my head one day. I was sitting on my sofa and I just had this vision of a little elephant. And I thought, oh my God, little elephant, he's grieving. I just decided that his grandpa had died and he didn't know what to do with all of his great big feelings. And so at first, I thought he would go all around the world to find out what to do, but he ended up staying in his own backyard. And
Isn't it cute how these characters take on a life of their own? They just don't go around the world.
No. A little much to go all the way around the world for a little grieving elephant, but he could stay in his own backyard. And he would go to meet various animals in his backyard. And I actually started researching about like the personality animals so that I could kind of equate a feeling with that particular animal. So when he goes to the hippopotamus that he talks about, he learns about anger because she opens her mouth big and wide, and so that was important to me for each animal to represent something else that he could learn on his journey. And it was very important to me to have no identifying religious aspect to it, because I want people I want families to be able to insert their own ideas about religion and that kind of thing.
And I just have to pause and say, you all did such a good job of that. I mean, I make no secret of it on this platform. I'm part of the Orthodox Jewish community. And when I open books and they're just every cemetery has, like, it's full of crosses or stuff like that. I've worked with so many other religious communities and different minority groups and stuff like that, and it's a frustration that people have of, like, you've made an assumption about what every cemetery looks like, and now my kid, and because kids are this little box and they live in this, it doesn't look like it, then it isn't, right? And I love that, all of you really managed to keep your books so perfect for anyone, like across the board. And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I really have to applaud you all on that.
It's an important point. That's why I brought it up, because, it is important for each family to be able to deal with that in their own way. And then the other thing for me was I really wanted to have a book that would express honest and real language about dying.
Yes.
You'll never hear me say the word lost or past. It's all about that his grandpa died. That means, so that was really important for me to be able to get across. And then the other part was there is a little squirrel who is Eddie's best friend, and his name is Solly, and he is in honor of my dad, whose name was Saul, nicknamed Saul. And my dad was a school teacher, and Solly in the book, the little squirrel, is sort of like a teacher, because he comes along, and what Solly does is actually interact with the reader by asking questions, like probably, like yours, Corey, where there's questions asked, but Solly who asks the question. So it helps a parent or caregiver open a conversation with the child about some things that are really difficult. Like, would you like to tell me how you love died? And Solly asks that question. So he helps along the way. And it was a wonderful way for me to have my dad be a part of the book too.
Yeah. That was so beautiful. I didn't know that. Solly is a cute character who I love, but now I know what the meaning there is, and that's just so beautiful. I'm looking through some of the questions that came in on there, but somebody asked an excellent question, and this you can all answer, not just as authors, but as those of you who've worked in the grief field. It's a widow who asked this question, and she said her kids don't like to talk about grief. They're young and they like to talk about anything but grief. And she said she'd love to bring in these books. And her question is that like imposing grief upon them? Like, if she sits down and reads this to them, like, would you suggest that she just wait it out? Would you suggest she starts with a book and sees where it goes? Walk us through this, your thoughts on this. I thought it was a great question. And I just want to say, I don't think there's an easy, straightforward answer. And I think we're all going to make this disclaimer. It really obviously depends. We don't know who your kid is. We don't know even the ages, frankly. It does sound like they're pretty young because mom is still reading to them. And we don't know how long ago their parent died. So, and we don't know the dynamics of why there's avoidance in there, and, what the trajectory was. Was there an illness that was never talked about before? Or, and I'm sure the two of you being child life specialists probably have a lot to say about that. But, or was this just a sudden loss that they never had an opportunity to process? I mean, there's like a million different options, but let's go broad and we can make all the assumptions we like, because this is Instagram and this is an anonymous question and we just don't know. So go with it wherever you want to go. And what would you say if you're with a mom who asks, should I read your book to my kid who doesn't want to talk about grief?
You know what? I'll just start with a broad statement of what I believe. I think that what gets in the way for a lot of caregivers is that, and adults, just adults in general, us grown-ups, we often think that we're supposed to come to our kids and say, tell me, how are you feeling? Right? We all know, because we've all been kids, and when somebody says, how are you feeling? What's the answer? Fine. Or don't want to answer lots and lots of direct questions. So we have to find a way to kind of sneak our way in there, to talk. And so I think that's number one. I want parents and caregivers and adults in general that it's important to find other ways to kind of get in there to talk to kids. And a book is a wonderful way because it's not so direct. We can say something like, hey, I found this book and I'm just curious to see what you think about it, and kind of open it up that way. There's so many ways that we can get children to open up about grief that we don't think about, like, you're watching a movie and you remember that the child and dad loved watching that movie together. And so maybe you ask, oh, I remember when you and dad used to watch that movie together. What do you remember about that? Just any other ways that we can.
I just want to also take a second to say, look at your body language as you're doing that. It's not, oh, what do you remember about dad when you guys used to watch it? And then you go all heavy and emotional on the kid. And a 4-year-old will pull back from that because that's not a pleasant place to sit. Versus, what do you remember? What was the funniest scene, right? And it's just like, it becomes so much more okay. Like I was watching you do that, Randy, and I'm like, that's where the kid will go. I think adults oftentimes think that because, look, death, grief, loss is a very scary topic for many adults. And I think many are afraid of it. And so it becomes this heavy black thing in their heads, like this dark idea. And it's like, who says it has to be? Yeah.
And kids like totally feed off of that energy too. And I mean, I would even say this goes like kind of backwards some, but I would encourage people to use grief books even when they're not grieving, because we will all grieve someday. That is part of life. And having opportunities where these type of books are brought into the home before they even are face to face with some big, death or loss or whatever the grief situation is, and having some sort of literacy about what grief even is. I've also had kids, even some older children, say, what is grief? Like that's a big, complicated word that some adults don't even know how to articulate what grief even is or feels like. So that's, the wonderful thing with all of the children's books that can break down and simplify some of this for even the adults that are, consuming this as well. But I would also, go backwards there to say everybody should have these books in their library to help make it less taboo and help that conversation naturally come up as loss situations do arise in their home.
Yeah. I would add to that too, that children are mirrors. And so I would get really curious with that in understanding what is happening in the relational dynamic of the home, that child may be like they have to protect their parent from big emotions, right? Children are so intuitive, they're so smart, and they'll oftentimes act out in ways to protect the people they love, usually their parents or their siblings. The other follow-up that I have is I've written a second book, and I just went through the first revision process where I'm doing a whole chapter on the language of grief. And there are many languages around the world that do not have a word for grief.
And do not, I'm sorry, I missed it. That do not
have a word for grief. Like in Portuguese, there is no word for grief. Even in French, there's a loose translation of it, right? But it doesn't always translate. And so we have to get very clear on what Jessica was saying, like, what are we talking about when we're talking about grief in the first place?
Wow. What is that second book going to be about? We get a sneak preview for a second.
Sure. Yeah. I'll announce the title here. It's called My Grief is Like, Analogy for Grieving Teens. So it is a book for teenagers, and it is essentially what the children's book is, but much longer. And it really goes over the same kind of concepts: the somatic, the cognitive, the relational, the spiritual, the identity that happens during a teen's grieving process. So that's the second book that's going to be coming out, hopefully.
Hopefully when? November?
Winter of 2020.
Well, this is incredible. And it's brave to write one book. It's braver to write a second book. I think, Jessica, you were just talking about writing a second book also, right?
Yeah. My second book is called The ABCs of Grief, and it's part of a series. There's 3 books, so that one's the first one, and we are nearing the end of the illustration phase. So at some point in the fall, it will be out for everybody. So I'm so excited about it.
And what are you doing in that book that you didn't do in the, like, where do you see it going? What's different about it?
So the ABCs of grief is grief in general. So it's not just bereavement. So it's not super niched down to sibling grief. So it's bereavement and all other types of grief. And it follows the alphabet through what grief is all about. Because again, that word grief is really pretty abstract when you think about it. So it goes through, one letter at a time, helping children and, maybe adults, really taking that word apart and learning about what grief is all about. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What are the experiences that come with the grief journey?
Sounds fascinating. Really fascinating. Wow. Okay, I give you guys a lot of credit. I'm like, listening to this, I'm like, how do you have the energy to write another book? It's incredible. I'm just looking through some of the other questions. Okay, so just a quick curious question people asked is, did you have kid testers, and was there anything you changed or tweaked because of an insight from a kid or from a mom or from a dad or something?
I'll go. I had a couple of kids read, but most of my tweaking was in terms of, well, I had an editor who worked with me because my book is rhyme. And so and the reason that I did it in rhyme was because grief is such a difficult topic. And I thought, well, if it rhymes, it might be a little bit easier to take in. And I just like writing. And so I did have an editor who worked with me on, making the rhyme. And then I actually had, from working in the field of grief, I had several colleagues who I called upon really to make sure that everything I was doing was grief accurate. And so that's, and definitely made, changes based on feedback from colleagues and such. So that was really wonderful and so meaningful and helpful.
Wow.
Yeah, and a similar process. So I only published my book, so I have a publisher, and there's a lot that I'm not allowed to do with the manuscript has been submitted. So before it was submitted, I had content editors and experts look at it. So my colleagues were some of those people. And then the family that inspired, the 2 families that inspired me to write this, I had them look at it. It had been many years since I'd read them, so I felt comfortable reaching out to them. So both the parents and the siblings read it for me, gave me feedback, and then I fine polished it, sent it off to the 30 different, queried 30 different publishers, got the one yes back, and then worked very closely with the publishing editor to make sure that the manuscript was where it needed to be.
I echo that. I had very similar process, had fellow colleagues reviewing it first. I also, as I was writing this book, I was reading it out loud over and over again at home, and my own children, they were not shy with telling me when things were not right. And they also, I've actually made some edits to it since it was published with like where the words are on the page in relationship to the illustrations. And they told me that things were not right. They were not in the right order. So yeah, kids are very honest with things. Even
kids are amazing with this. I have to say that I have a friend of mine who's writing a kid's book not related to grief. and she asked one of my kids to read it. And I'm nice. She's my friend. What am I going to say, right? And she was like, record the kid on video with feedback.
Yeah.
And I sent it to her, and she told me, she says, I have a full chat where I'm saving all these kitties. She says, like, I have 10 of them. She says, because they are spot on. They are spot on. And she's right. At the end of the day, like we said at the beginning, if you're going to write for kids, it's really hard to write for kids without having any kid involvement at some level in there. I want to go into the child life piece just for a second, because a couple people just messaged me asking, what's a child life specialist? And I realized, you know what? Okay, I don't think people actually know enough about this field. Let's talk about it for a couple minutes, because that actually is a really important phase sometimes in the hospice or the palliative care, or like if people have the opportunity, should we say, to deal with stuff before, it's a whole nother world of healing from grief. So let's hear from both of you a little bit about the field and, kind of, I guess, what you'd love, like, if you now have your TED Talk.
Sure. I guess I can start, and then Corey can add to it, because child life is, we wear many different hats, and we're all taught to have our little like elevator speech of what we do exactly, because it can be really hard to condense what we do into a short 1-2 liner. Essentially what we do is we help children cope with difficult life events. Traditionally, child life specialists are found in the hospital setting. That over the last decade or two has started to evolve, and we are now showing up in different places, like private practice and hospice and dental offices and schools, and the list goes on. Anywhere where somebody is facing, really big changes, whether that is a medical change or a death in the family, or really anything that is something that is difficult for them to understand and cope with. That's where we come in to help support them. So we have a background in child development, and we use a whole range of modalities related to therapeutic play and psychoeducation. So I will let Corey add into that, because we have many layers to what we do.
No, that was very well said. I mean, I think you ask 10 child life specialists what's child life, you're going to get 10 different answers, because there is a foundation that is absolutely the intersection of child development and the impact that stress, trauma, and hospitalization has on that development. So when you have a 3-year-old and they're faced with a hospitalization, behaviorally, what's appropriate, right? And so we're at like healthcare professional that helps identify and decode a child's behavior in a hospital environment, and to also scaffold and support their coping. And the child's coping, the siblings coping, the family's coping, we're oftentimes a bridge for the medical team. We're the ones playing with the child or seeing them in a different way. So we're helping to really help the healthcare team see this child in a holistic way to help minimize the impact that hospitalization and illness can have on a child's psychosocial development. The field is growing exponentially. I have been a program director for 2 master's degree programs in child life. And so I know that there were some questions about, how do I become a child life specialist? There are lots of wonderful programs out there, both at the bachelor's and the master's. It's a really important field to go into, but I really want to emphasize that foundation of family systems, of child development, and of the neurobiological changes that are happening under stress and duress. And then we pile on top of that, okay, how do we translate that for a 3-year-old? How do we explain what's a bone marrow aspiration in a way that isn't scary, the child can really understand and then process through with medical play or with preparation? I could go on and on. So that's
No, I think you both really explained it really well, which kind of takes us into an interesting space. And that is that, unfortunately, and I don't know if you see this as much as I see this, a lot of people will take the time to speak to the adults in the family and prepare them for an eventual death. They'll even do that with older teens. And it's like, the 5-year-old doesn't get it. Like, why are we even telling him, right? Or why are we even telling her? And I don't know if you see that. I unfortunately meet them after the fact, right? So I meet a 5 or 6-year-old who's completely confused, somewhat traumatized by something life-changing that they didn't see coming. And I'm just wondering, as all of you being in this field, like, if you had, you know, some ability to speak to a family that's going through this type of stuff, and it is, I want to say, it's horrific to have a family member who people know are dying. Like, it's just, it's a horrible feeling. What would you say to them about the kids in the picture, especially as you see them after? What do you wish you could tell the adults in that picture? Randy, do you want to go?
Yeah, I do. Because I'd like to speak from my own personal experience as a 10-year-old who experienced the death of my dad, who had been sick for 3.5 years with leukemia, but nobody told us. My brother was 14 when and so, you know, it was, when my dad died, it was 66. And so you can imagine, as hard as it is to talk about today, you can imagine back then, there was no guidance. Nobody knew how to talk about anything. But I know I lived in a home where there was 3.5 years of these two young parents who were grappling with this horrible illness. And yet nobody was talking about it. And so you know, part of what I love to do is talk about what that experience was like, and how I think I wrote a post about a cool cloth and a song. Because if somebody had told me that my dad was dying, maybe I could have sat next to him and put a cool cloth on his head, and we could have sang together and played music together, whatever. You know, the point being that children need to be brought in, and we are so afraid to be honest with children and help them understand what's going on. And it's so much worse to not know, to live in a cloud of feelings all around you, but you don't know what they are and you don't understand what they are. And so if I can offer anything, you know, to parents and caregivers, you know, anybody who's involved with children that are living with impending death and grief, talk about it, be honest, use honest language. Obviously, what you're going to say to a 3-year-old is different than a 14-year-old, but, you know, and it's incumbent upon us as adults to find age-appropriate language, of course. But, you know, that's what I want to impart most of all, is to, and I'll just say one more real quick thing, because I worked with grieving kids in an in-house grief support setting, and also in camps for years. And I will never forget, I always got the little 9-year-old boy for some reason from my group at camp. And these boys were so cool. And I'll never forget, one little boy started a conversation by saying, "Why didn't the adults in my life trust me with the information that was going on?" And I was blown away. And the next thing you know, every other kid in that group, 9 years old, were talking about the same thing. Kids crazy, they want to be respected, they want to know what's going on.
You are so right. And it's funny that you're saying this, because I was 9 when my mother died. And years later, I was talking to my father about this. I was an adult. I was in my 20s, and I was telling him something about the fact, like, I don't get it. Like, why didn't anybody tell me? And he literally was floored. He was like, there were ambulances coming. Your mother was with a pump in the living room. She went to the hospital every 2.5 weeks, and we didn't hide that from you. You went to visit her. What did you expect? And I'm like, and I looked at him then and I said, like, I was a kid who totally didn't process that. As far as I'm concerned, and this is what I told him, I said, I had strep a lot as a kid. I went to the doctor. I'd stay home for 2 days, get meds, go back to school. I said, as far as I was concerned, my mother was sick. Yeah, she was very sick. I said, but dying was not part of the equation. And as far as I was concerned, we could live like this. My mother was a ball of fun. So fine. So she went to the hospital for a week and a half for some therapy, and she came home with a pole, but she also came home with fun, and everything was normal. And I could live with that. And in my head, that's how she would live till she was 150 for all I cared. And I have to say, it was an incredible moment for both of us, because my father looked at me and he was like, if I would have thought that, I would have done things differently. He goes, we were not into this hiding piece. He goes, but it just never dawned on me that it didn't click. And it was very healing, because I think I was very judgy with him, and I was very judgy with parents in general. I was, oh, come on. And then I realized, unless we tell them, they don't realize that the 4-year-old, the 10-year-old, the 11-year-old is not getting this. And I think that that's part of probably the education that we're all doing, is this piece of when somebody's dealing with a family member that's really, really sick and in hospice care or whatever, they just assume that kids must know, especially if we're not hiding it.
Right.
Yeah, I think there are two pieces. That lack of talking to kids directly and concretely comes from two places. Either it comes from that assumption that you're talking about, or in Randy's situation, and maybe this isn't correct for your situation, but the other avenue is, I want to protect my child from all of this, this heaviness, this grief. And of course, it's going to be heavy. No matter what you say to them, it's going to be heavier if we don't let them in and help them understand what is happening right now, give them time to process it, give them time to connect. And, that's not protecting them in any way. That's adding more grief to their plate, because they have to figure it out on their own.
Yes. Yeah. That figuring it out on their own is when misconceptions, fears, the potential to develop the mental health, concerns that we know can be when there is a death, in a young child's life. It isn't predictive. It doesn't mean that every young child will develop anxiety. But when you have euphemistic language and you have a way of which adults simultaneously don't trust children with information and then trust them with too much information, well, they'll figure it out, right? So which one is it? And that's really so important, to go back to that child development, go back to understanding that cause and effect doesn't really start to click in until middle childhood, until 10 and up, really on their own. And so if we're assuming that a child will piece A plus B equals C, then they're going to be creating a narrative that's far more scary, that's far more fearful. A lot of the misconceptions that arise can be, well, I caused the death, well, something that I did must have made mom sick, or, and I see all the heads nodding, these are all things that we've confronted and faced with the families that we've worked with. And, I go back to the old quote from Alan Wolfelt: if a child is old enough to love, a child is old enough to grieve. And that includes our babies, that includes our toddlers, that includes the ones that haven't, acquired their language skills yet. We can still talk to our children, because trauma lives in our bodies. Our bodies remember, right? So even if that child doesn't have the language skills, their nervous system remembers.
Oh, yeah.
And we have to be very mindful that children at any age, they do have the capacity we are their mirror. And so as the adults in that child's life, it's just so important. And if the parent can't do it because they're grieving, there are people like us, there are healthcare professionals, there are support people, there are books like ours that can help you find the words, that can help you figure out what you're feeling so that you can help your child figure out what you're feeling.
That's beautiful. And I want to kind of wrap up with asking each of you if you could tell us some of your favorite lines from your book, or one or two favorite lines. I thought this was a great question somebody said, just like, what would be your favorite line, and what would be like the line that makes the book worth it in your head? I'll give you a second to look that up if you want. While I'm looking at some of the questions that came in here, somebody said, I lost a sister to cancer and I'm currently receiving treatments in pill form. I was never informed about the genetic mutation in my family. I could have avoided breast cancer and ovarian. I want to just say to you that my heart is with you. So many of us, and this is another pet peeve of mine, and we're actually going to be doing some work on my page about this. I do actually have a video for anyone who has a parent with any sort of cancer, and it is hugely helpful. We did it with a phenomenal oncologist. And the next thing that I'll be working on actually is with a cardiologist for anybody with heart history of any sort of heart failure or cardiac diseases. And we're going to work through different diseases because unfortunately, for a lot of us, we're adults now. When we were growing up, it was just not a thing to talk about even name the disease. I have people who are adults who are like, I know my mother died because there was something wrong with her kidneys, but I don't know what it was. Yeah. Right? And it's really hard to go to a doctor and say, is it genetic? But I have no idea what she suffered from. And unfortunately, people sometimes have lost their second parent, or their parents were divorced, and they don't have communication with anybody else who can fill in those pieces. And as adults, we suffer for that tremendously. And I'm so sorry to hear that you're going through this. And I think this should just be a wake-up call for anybody on here who has any medical history. Share it with your kids, share it with your families, just tell them, because you can save another person's life. It's so sad, like how she's saying her aunt had it at 26, never told us to get tested, never let our doctors know. It's it's so painful to hear this, but we hear this all the time. Another one said, I'm wowed by all of your amazing abilities to speak about your grief experiences and share that with us. I hope to one day be able to talk about my dad without instantly crying. And I think we can all comment about this, but I think that there are moments where obviously we'll still talk about parts of our grief and it will just bring us to tears. And then there are those of us who've gotten into the mode, so to speak, where I know about myself, and I'll let anybody else speak to this, but I know for myself, I've done so many years of therapy. I continue to do that because I want to work through this piece and be able to embrace it. And actually, just to make you laugh, I had a conversation with my therapist where she said, I'm going to tell you what your next frontier is. You're way too scared of death. Not so much of dying, but of death. Like, I've never allowed myself to witness a death from the outside, so to speak. And she's like determined. She's like, you're either going to train as a death doula or you're going to do something like that, because we're going to break this fear within you. And she goes, even if you never practice, like, you're going to have to do something that's going to put you in this line of fire. And my therapist makes me do crazy things. So, but I think that's how I've gotten used to it. I can let anybody else talk about why we don't bawl our eyes out when we talk about the topic. Because sometimes, by the way, I feel like there must be something wrong with me. It's crazy. But yeah.
Well, I'll just say real quickly, since I'm the old lady in Instagram.
Such a fun old lady. Yeah.
I am, and it's okay. I'm proud, because what I'm able to offer is that, 57 years later, I will still find myself falling to my knees, and I will still cry, and I still ache and yearn, and that is grief. And I also live a good life, and I experience joy, but understanding that is what grief is, and that those moments are going to come, then I can embrace, I can hold my little heart, my little 10-year-old heart, and you know, and then keep going. But the minute we say like, oh, if I could just talk about my dad without instantly crying, why not? Why not instantly cry? It's okay. You know, you miss that person, love that person. Maybe you're angry at that person, you know, whatever it might be. But, you know, the language to me is so interesting that it's not okay to talk and cry at the same time. Absolutely it is. We can talk through tears. So
Yeah, I think that that's a very good nuance that you brought up there. Okay, do we want to go to the lines in the book? So, Jessica, why don't you start first?
All right, sure. So for those that don't know, my book is deeply personal in that not only the story but the illustrations. So mine's kind of tied to the illustrations a little bit, but one of my favorites in the book is this piece here. Even though she's not physically here, we will always feel her connection, their mom said. What kind of connection? Asked Rowan. She can't touch us, Milo was sure. Sometimes little rainbows glide across her pictures on the wall as if she is sending a warm hug. And the little piggy you both carry around, your sister snuggled her in the hospital. Those are little reminders that she was here and continues to live on within us forever, said their mom. And these illustrations here, this is literally the little piggy that my daughter kind of snuggled in the hospital right after I delivered her. And these pictures are exactly what is on my wall. This is a picture of my daughter. I know it doesn't have like all the detail, but it is so deeply personal, and it's not something that everybody knows about my book. There are lots of little nuggets in there, but it's something that is really personal to us as a family, and it's really heartwarming seeing my children pick this out and identify all of these little things that you know, they see and know and feel and have all the memories behind it.
Beautiful. Wow. Okay. Jessica.
or
I'm sorry, Corey.
Sure. So I have two pages, but the first page is, I think it's really representative of how my book is used as a psychotherapeutic tool. So it says, sometimes it feels like a color to me. Grief can feel like one color. It can feel like lots of colors all at once. If your grief were a color, what color would it be? And one of my favorite spreads is, everyone feels grief sometimes. Grief is a normal part of missing someone special. Grief can change over time. It might get louder or quieter. It may change color. It could get bigger or smaller.
Wow. You know what I loved about that color page is that you were so good about having all those neat paints and then that really messy painted picture. And I think like as an adult, when I looked at that page, I was like, yeah, right. Some days I look like I have it all together. Some days, like you were saying, the grief is all over the place. And it's just like, oh, I didn't see that coming. Thank you for ruining my day today. I appreciate it. And yeah, that's, you know, that's so reflective of that. That was beautiful. Thank you. And Randy.
really beautiful. Well, I pick, this is Zoe Zebra, who I just love. And the pages for Zoe read, Zoe, when I have two feelings, just like is black and white, how do I choose between the two? Which one do you think is right? And then little Solly Squirrel asks, what are you feeling? Where do you feel that in your body? And then Zoe answers, I love both my colors, Eddie. They're a part of me. So when you have two feelings, they're both okay, you see. So I like that because I think for adults, we forget it's okay to be feeling two things at the same time. And so I just love Zoe anyway. I love the illustration. So
I love that. And I think that for many of us as adults, like it could have saved us a few years worth of work if we actually knew that we could hold two things at once. And going back to that person who was saying, like, talking about their father without falling apart and stuff like that. Like, I wish I would have known as a kid that sad and happy are not mutually exclusive. And, you know, we really have the ability to hold both. And that dialect, you know, kind of is, yeah, it's okay not to be okay. Exactly. You know, of that thing. That was beautiful. This live was so meaningful, moving, and gorgeous. I really hope that anyone who's watching the replay or who's here live, all of your pages offer such rich content. And I think you know that because from my Friday finds, I share a lot from your pages and stuff like that. But I've learned a tremendous amount. And I think that if there's anyone looking to grow in their grief learning and be able to support kids around them or be able to support themselves in their own grief journey, then you really just follow all these wonderful women in their pages, and it's all there in the live. You can see it says Dr. Corey Lee, there's Grief and Grits and Kids Grief Support. And really, I think that there's just so much incredible stuff that you've offered for me, and I know that you offer it for so many people, and I'm just so grateful that we were able to pull this together. And thank you so much for your time and for everything that you do. I'm really excited for the 2 new books, guys. When that comes out, we will need to do another live.
I'm here for it.
Amazing.
What an honor and a pleasure to be with all of you. Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Take care.